we touched briefly upon the protein per kilo there, 1.5 to 1.8
Yeah.
grams is what the research, more or less the research falls between that that window of like 1.5 to maybe 2 grams, that sort of covers most spaces in 99% of times. My question is because a vast majority of at least my audience and significant majority of your audience is also from the bodybuilding background, where everything is about maximizing your IGF levels and your GH levels and your protein synthesis, and ultimately, what is that we can do to get as close to looking like the Belgian bull, for the lack of a better example. So,
Yes.
would there ever be any exceptions you make that where you would be like, okay, you know what, under these XYZ scenarios, and there is merit to go as high as 2.5 to 3 grams, obviously, making sure the person doesn't have any pre-existing kidney conditions or any colon conditions or anything like that. Let's say we have a healthy bodybuilder or aspiring bodybuilder who just wants to maximize their hypertrophy. So is there ever a merit to consider 2.5 grams or 3 grams of protein per kilo? I mean, especially if we are going in towards, say, in the cutting phase, in significant calorie deficit. Like, we have calorie surplus in off season when we are consuming plenty of carbohydrates and consuming plenty of fat, so which might another question in there is do carbohydrates have any muscle proteins sparing impact? That's one question in there. And the second is, would the recommendation be different in a severe calorie deficit, that let's say in calorie surplus, you might say there's really no need to go above 2 grams, but hey, if you're in a severe calorie deficit, yes, you could go 3 grams, but you might just say that there's a merit in even in off season to go 2.5, 3 grams. So under what circumstances, long story short, where you might consider 2.5, even 3 grams, even higher?
Okay, that is a great question, Harry. And I want to frame it by saying that the existing body of research on protein requirements for maximizing muscle mass do not, by and large, they do not examine advanced trainees. I mean, we're looking at people who they're calling resistance trained, and they qualify by having a minimum of 6 months of training experience at 2 to 3 times a week minimum. Then you can call them trained, resistance trained subjects.
Yeah.
And really, if you set the bar too high, for example, if you want to find highly trained athletes, highly trained who are further along in their potential for muscle mass gains, and let's say you require a minimum of, let's say, 2 years or 5 years of resistance training at an average of 3 to 5 times a week. Problem is, it's hard to put together studies when you can't recruit enough subjects. Right. So this is always going to be a problem. It's always going to be a gray area in the literature. And so what we can do is take a look at who's being studied in these studies. And it's really on the male side, we're looking at guys in their mid-teens, low 20s percentage body fat. And we're basing our protein requirements on those guys, and we're basing it on total body weight. So if you can imagine much more highly muscled, highly athletic subjects, like the bodybuilding fans of myself and you, we're looking at lower body fat percents. We're looking at much more lean mass. We're looking at much more highly trained individuals. And so applying the standards of what maxes out muscle in guys who are in their high teens, low 20s at the leanest, really, with a minimum of 6 months training two times a week. You're making a leap of faith by saying we've exhausted everything we know with this limit of 1.6 right there, And so what we can do is look at some of the observational literature on highly trained competitive bodybuilders. And Andrew Chappelle actually has done that with natural bodybuilders at the elite national level. And their protein intakes during contest prep, the men were right around 3.0 to 3.3. So it was the top 5 placers consumed 3.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, protein wise. And so, is it causal? Can we say that this is the best thing we can possibly do? Well, not necessarily, but we can certainly say, well, that's what the top guys, that's what the champs are doing. And so sometimes you have to take it seriously when you're looking at how the best in their class are doing it. The women consumed a little bit less protein. They consumed 2.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. These top 5 placing national level drug-free bodybuilders, the women. And this is Andrew Chappelle, 2018, I believe, was the study. And we can also look at the literature on recomposition. So recomposition, for anybody who's not familiar, it's the phenomenon where you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. And so one of my friends and colleagues, Chris Barakat, or Barakat, I always mess his last name up. But anyway, Chris Barakat wrote this great paper in the Strength and Conditioning Journal that you can find it, the free full text stuff. And it's on recomposition in resistance trained subjects. And lo and behold, there are several studies documenting recomposition in non-sedentary subjects, not your just typical untrained, straight off the couch subjects. So we're talking about resistance training subjects in their mid to high teens body fat percentage wise. They're certainly not elite, but they are definitely intermediate. Some of them are higher intermediate, and they're experiencing recomposition. Now, the interesting common thread amongst these individuals was their protein intake, and that was 2.6 to 3.5 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass. So that was their intake. And this value is pretty close to the figures reported by a systematic review done by Helms et al. In 2014. And what they found was that lean resistance-trained subjects in hypocaloric conditions consumed 2.3 to 3.1 grams of protein per kilogram of fat-free mass. And so in sum, what we can gather from these data is that the answer is yes, there has been observation where protein consumption beyond a gram per pound, sometimes all the way up to about 1.5 grams per pound, shows benefit during dieting phases in highly trained athletes, in resistance trained athletes. And so I don't think we can ignore those findings because there's several studies that converge upon those findings. And I think we have to be able to drop our egos and pay attention to that.